Welcome to U.S. History and Catholicism, a journey through time, ideology, and belief. In this course, we won't just be memorizing names and dates. We'll be asking real questions, deep ones, even dangerous ones. Let me start with one. Can history tell the truth? And I don't mean, can it report what happened? I mean, can it mean something? Can we actually understand what happened, why it happened, and what it says about us? Can it mean something for our souls, for our salvation, something for the resurrection of a people under God? Let's start with three principles that help us answer those questions, three keys to making history intelligible. First, history is concerned with particular facts. This separates history from disciplines like math or physics. Science gives you laws, history gives you people, events, decisions, context, particulars. Universal truth is a truth which is true about some subject in all times, all places, and all circumstances. For example, in geometry, it is proven that in any and all triangles, the three angles taken together add up to two right angles. We say any triangle, not just about the particular triangle sketched on the page, or the one in some particular geometry book. Furthermore, when the chemist teaches that table salt is composed of sodium and chlorine, this holds true for any and all table salt. History, properly speaking then, does not, of itself, arrive at universal general conclusions, but only teaches what happened with particular or most persons, places, and dates. People, events, decisions, context, particulars. But most importantly, and something this textbook doesn't say right away, it gives you questions, hundreds of them sometimes. That means history is messy. It's not a laboratory. It's a battlefield, a courtroom, a confessional sometimes, all rolled into one. Take the founding of Maryland in 1634. Historians can tell you it was a haven for English Catholics. But why? Here's what the textbook says. Maryland had first been discovered by the Catholic Esteban Gomez. Its first English settlers were also Catholics. George Calvert, named Lord Baltimore by his friend King James I, bought a part of Newfoundland's Avalon Peninsula, where an unsuccessful colony was established. He then turned south to Virginia, where John Pott was governor. Having refused the oath of supremacy that Pott tried to get him to sign, Lord Baltimore sailed back to England to petition Charles I for a charter for land where Catholics could practice their faith. During this period, he died, but Charles granted the charter to Calvert's son Cecil in 1632, making him proprietor. Despite Protestant pressure, Cecil, his brother Leonard Calvert, and 200 colonists managed to board the Ark and Dove and landed in the northern part of the Virginia colony. They named it Maryland in honor of Queen Henriette Marie and privately in honor of the Blessed Virgin Mary. On board the ship were Protestants as well as Catholics led by Father Andrew White. Cecil instructed the Catholics on board that, quote, all acts of Roman Catholic religion are to be done as privately as may be, and that they instruct all Roman Catholics to be silent upon all occasions of discourse concerning matters of religion, end quote. These regulations were to be observed both, quote, at land as well as at sea. At the same time, though, he told his Catholic men that his intention in the new land was, quote, the honor of God by endeavoring the conversion of the savages to Christianity, end quote. Father White describes their landing on St. Clement's Island, March 25, 1634. On the day of the Annunciation of the Holy Virgin Mary, on the 25th of March, in the year 1634, we offered in this island for the first time the sacrifice of the Mass. In this region of the world, it had never been celebrated before. The sacrifice being ended, having taken up on our shoulders the great cross which we had hewn from a tree, and going in procession to the place that had been designated, the governor, commissioners, and other Catholics participating in the ceremony, we erected it as a trophy to Christ the Savior, while the litany of the Holy Cross was chanted humbly on the bended knees with great emotion of soul, end quote. The first city they built was St. Mary's City. What made the Maryland colony unique was that religious toleration designated it from its founding. This seemed the most prudent choice to Cecil, as from the beginning there were many Protestant servants in their company. In 5 years, they would become free citizens, which would greatly increase the number of free English. Religious toleration was formally passed in the Maryland Toleration Act in 1649. Nevertheless, it forbade Jews and heathens from practicing and enforced those moral laws common to both Protestants and Catholics. Thus, only Catholics and Protestants enjoyed religious freedom. Catholics could not criticize other religions and could only practice their faith privately. Cecil himself had to promote the foundation of Protestant communities. Father White and Father John Altham began the work of making converts among the Indians. Chief Chalamocan was won over. He was baptized Charles and his wife Mary in the presence of the colony's authorities. He soon brought the Piscataway tribe and their villages with him. They even extended their missions into Virginia and converted some colonists there. Recall that Catholicism was illegal in the Virginia territory. It was here that William Claiborne, a Virginia politician, captured Father White and sent him to be tried in London. He only narrowly escaped. The Indians donated 10,000 acres of their land in Maryland to the Jesuits as a place for missions and Jesuit farmland. Though Cecil was on rough terms with the Jesuits over this land donation, to further their work, he granted the Jesuits permission to work on this land for the civilization of the Indians. Indian girls went to school in St. Mary's, and many married into English families. Cecil's policy urging Catholics to keep quiet about the faith in a Protestant atmosphere was no abnormality among Catholics in England. Cecil's father was one of 300 signers of a Remonstrance of Grievances, which begged the Pope to revoke his appointment of a diocesan bishop in England. If it were not for this letter to the Pope, a Catholic prelate named Richard Smith would have been the first Catholic English bishop living permanently in England for 70 years. The English Catholics were afraid that a diocesan government in England would appear as a rival power to the English government. They were afraid that at any minute the government would renew persecutions against them, as it had in the past. Thus, most Catholics, most English Catholics, forced by the circumstances, became afraid to practice their faith openly. As we will see later, this policy became the rule for many Catholics in America. In a green box called In Our Opinion, which is the textbook publishers. This compromise between the two religions in the form of religious toleration, though it began with good intentions, did not lead to peace in the long run, as will be apparent later. Granting freedom to men to practice false religions openly, such as Cecil did for Protestants in Maryland, is in principle contrary to the consistent teaching of the Catholic Church, as can be seen from multiple papal encyclicals, such as Leo XIII's Immortali Dei. However, Pope Leo does mention in that same encyclical that at times it is permissible to tolerate false religions being practiced in the state to avoid a greater evil, such as revolution, etc. Perhaps Cecil was doing just that, avoiding greater evils. It was personal, political, spiritual, all at once. It was universal. In a word, it was Catholic. When we say history is about facts, we mean this man, this moment, this mission. And that matters. Because if you're going to understand how Catholicism interacted with the birth of America, you can't do it with abstract ideas. You need names. You need battles. You need letters. You need motives. You need to know who was in the room and who wasn't. You need to see the mission of Christ and his apostles in it all. The second principle that helps us answer those introductory questions. History has largely taken on human faith. We weren't there. You and I never sat in the Continental Congress. We never met Thomas Jefferson. We never met Elizabeth Ann Seton. We only know them through the high school textbooks owned and run by the same communist propagandists who run the news and entertainment industry. It's cultural Marxism, and it's something I've written on. But we believe they existed, those people. We believe people saw them, wrote about them, debated them. We don't have video proof of the Battle of Lepanto, but we believed it happened. This is why G.K. Chesterton said, and I quote, "Tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors." In other words, history relies on trust, not blind trust, but human trust, like the trust in a good witness in a courtroom or a saint's testimony. What can you, the student, do when the historian states something particular as, "The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. Should you believe this statement? Can you prove this to yourself by going back in time and witnessing the event? Instead, we are forced to accept such claims on human faith, that is, believing what some other human tells us without proof. This is why one often hears comments such as, "Oh, so-and-so is a historian I greatly trust." If, on the other hand, we are not familiar with a historian or do not have human faith, we especially expect many footnotes and references to other works that are themselves more detailed, more official, or written close to the time of the event. But the fact is, history as a subject is largely taken on human faith. Of course, not all faith is merely human faith. We take things which we are certain are revealed by God on divine faith, because the person speaking, Christ, is not only a man, but also God, who can neither deceive nor be deceived. Of course, all of this becomes a problem when those writing history aren't trustworthy, or when narratives are shaped by power and politics more than fact. In my work at Reviver and the Hayride, I've shown how narratives don't just emerge, they're engineered. The Overton window, the shifting boundary of what's acceptable, isn't just political, it's historical. And that historical creates the present and the future. What gets told? What gets memory hold? Who decides which story becomes the story? Look at recent history. Gain-of-function research with Dr. Anthony Fauci was a conspiracy theory until it wasn't. Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation until it wasn't. Catholics who warned of medical tyranny were dangerous until reality caught up, until they weren't so dangerous. This is the same spirit that buried early Catholic patriots and elevated deists as the sole authors of liberty. It is the same spirit that has convinced all of us that the French Revolution was a good thing when it was very surgically implemented to destroy Catholicism in society, and under the pretense of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All false virtues many a pope have warned about before the 1960s. It's not just dishonest, it's all spiritually disordered. Because if you control the story, you control the soul of both a nation and a man and woman. Let's take a recent example, one that seems distant, but cuts to the core of how history is shaped in real time. The ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran are not just geopolitical developments, they're narrative developments. They're narrative deployments, often comedic ones. I have several articles up in just the last 10 or 11 days, not to mention my ongoing work dating back months and years. Events on the ground are framed in ways that train us to respond a certain way. One nation is always righteous, the other is always demonic. One story is told, the other is memory hold. That includes the missiles that supposedly dropped on Iran on Saturday. But what happens when that framing is reinforced by both political parties, by influencers we trust, by voices that claim to be anti-establishment? That's when you begin to see how narrative warfare really works. We're not just observing history, we're being prepared to remember it in a certain way. We're being conditioned to accept alliances, actions, escalations without question. Or are we? It is my guess, and my thesis in my work, that we are also being unconditioned at the same time, that we are seeing the previous conditioning in real time as a reference point, but are also being untrained, uneducated. I believe the hand of God is in all of this, regardless of whether Trump is good or bad, and that God is reverse infiltrating generations worth of propaganda, deception, and destruction as we speak. When the deeper truths eventually emerged in recent history about war, corruption, surveillance, they've arrived too late. But now they're not. They're working in conjunction with the actuals, as one Burning Bright terms it online. These actuals are what have propagandized us for generations. And yes, we are seeing the typical emotional responses already coded into the public mind for decades. But we also have warriors, Catholic warriors, talking, teaching, educating our way through it. And in a world governed by perception, memory becomes a battlefield. History becomes a weapon. The third principle that helps us answer these introductory questions: the causes of historical events are often uncertain. Now, this one stings, especially for modern minds. We like clean timelines. A leads to B, B leads to C. But history doesn't cooperate. It's layered, multi-causal, sometimes mysterious. I used to preach to my students, especially the smartest ones, we have to learn how to operate inside uncertainty. It doesn't mean that God is not a God of law and order, but it does mean that man is fallen and evil exists. And because of that, life is, well, uncertain. We have to learn how to navigate our way to the law and order of God on a daily basis by training our minds how to navigate the uncertainty, which means we have to fully understand both. Why exactly did the American colonists revolt? Because of taxes, philosophy, providence? All of the above? What exactly is the Federal Reserve of 1913? Who exactly was behind it? Are those people behind everything else that has enslaved us, both politically and culturally? Why did Charles Carroll, a Catholic, sign the Declaration when many Catholics feared backlash? Why did immigrants flood cities, build parishes, form mutual aid societies, yet still face brickbats and anti-Catholic mobs? My great-grandparents were Sicilians who came over on the boat and were viewed as Italian scum. Was it religion? Was it class? Race? Fear? History doesn't always tell us clearly, so we need prudence. We need discernment. And yes, we need humility. Perhaps the humility involved in a life of constant prayer and fasting, for the wisdom to see, to truly see. But when we're distracted, we can't do that, which brings us full circle to the evil behind it all. They know what those distractions do. They know what wisdom those distractions keep us from. When we study history, we cannot just read a textbook. We're not just reading a story or collection of narratives. We're entering a mystery, the very mystery of God and what it means to be His creation, navigating a world enslaved by a single seed spoken of in the book of Genesis. That's why St. Augustine, one of the great doctors of the Church, writing in the early 400s during the collapse of Rome, gave us a lens to read all of history, ancient and modern. In his City of God, Book 14, he said, "Two loves then have made two cities. The love of self, even to the contempt of God, made the earthly city. The love of God, even to the contempt of self, made the heavenly city." You see, history isn't just about causes and effects, not even about narratives as much as my written work is saturated with the theme of narrative warfare. At the risk of sounding soft, it's about loves. It's about loves. What do men love? And what are they willing to kill or die for? Where your heart lies, there your treasure will be. That is what we are dealing with. Where is your most cherished treasure? Where is your undying love? Behind every revolution, every war, every act of evangelization or rebellion lies a hierarchy of love. Which city do those build? Whose kingdom do those things serve? That's it. That's the crux of the matter. We can argue politics all we want, but history is about who loves what and which lover wins each successive battle. This binary framework, the two loves and two cities, is not simply an abstract theological concept. It's not just philosophy. It is the battlefield where the ancient enmity between the seed of the devil and the seed of the woman continue to clash. This is war. The two cities framework isn't a metaphor. It's a battlefield. This is Genesis 3:15. This is the ancient enmity. And if you're not looking at everything going on in the world through this very specific lens, you'll always end up lost at some point. As I explored in a Valentine's Day article just this year, that hostility didn't vanish after Eden. This conflict is the root of the spiritual warfare that underpins all political and cultural struggles. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and hers. It's still playing out in political movements, media manipulation, and global psyops. The earthly city, born from self-love and pride, is driven by the ancient tactics of deceit, division, and domination, tools wielded by the enemy to fracture truth and spread confusion. Meanwhile, the heavenly city, founded on the love of God and self-sacrifice, seeks to reveal lies and expose deception, thereby allowing truth to shine naturally. The breaking up on Valentine's Day metaphor in the article symbolizes this rupture, the breaking away from the false love of self and its counterfeit kingdoms toward a true love that demands humility and fidelity. Understanding this ancient spiritual enmity gives us a lens to discern the forces shaping history, not just the visible players, but the invisible spirits influencing hearts and minds. And today, like always, the strategy of the serpent is to manipulate our memory, to reverse the roles of victim and villain, patriot and traitor, saint and terrorist. That's why our job as Catholics isn't just to find the truth. It's to expose the lie, so that the truth, like light through a shattered window, can suddenly appear. So when we ask which city are we building, we are not merely questioning political allegiance, but which love animates our very souls. So let me ask you, if history depends on facts, what happens when the facts are buried? If it relies on testimony, what happens when the witnesses lie? If causes are unclear, how do we judge the past without pretending we are gods ourselves? Are we even asking anything remotely close to these questions? Or are we following narratives like sheep, cheering for one side, blind to the war behind the war? History isn't just a record, it's a reckoning. It forces us to face the past and ourselves. So don't expect this course to be safe. Expect it to be searching. Expect it to be dramatic, even theological. Because the story of America and the Catholic Church isn't just about what happened. It's about what is happening now, when we remember rightly and when we forget, or when we allow ourselves to be slaves to our masters and to have everything memory hold into oblivion. So I'll leave you with some questions. Which city are we building? Whose kingdom are we serving? Will you question? Will you dig? Will you remember? Those are the questions the true historian asks.